Hello there. Welcome. Thank you for tuning in to the Bell Bill podcast on the stories of the lost songs of Ireland. This is a new podcast, so I appreciate very much people clicking play and having a go and trying something new. Um, my name is Bill O'Brien. I'm Bald Bill. You can find me on Insta or any of the social media sites. My hobby is collecting old lost songs from Ireland. With a view to breathing life into them. Songs that are no longer sung, songs that are not recorded, and those that are not widely known are particular of interest to me. I focus very much on Tipperary, because that's where I live. I'm from Tipperary, I grew up here, and I will probably live here most of my life. So I'll be focusing on this county to start with, but I'm absolutely not limiting the scope of this podcast or my research to any specific era or geography. It's very true that Irish songs are a worldwide phenomena. There was a bit of an incident in the mid 1800s that caused an awful lot of Irish people to emigrate. They brought with them their songs, and they wrote plenty wherever they went in the world, be it Australia, America, Canada, England, all parts of Europe. They brought their experiences, they brought their songs with them, and they wrote about those experiences and shared them. And a lot of these have ended up in historical archives now. So I've spent a lot of the last 6 months browsing a lot of archives, a lot of historical archives that deal with music and songs and poetry, specifically looking for old, lost Irish traditional songs, particularly around the region from where I live. I've collected quite a few at this point. It's been a very, very fascinating adventure, and it's been very interesting trying to figure out the airs, how these songs were sang at the time, and to share this with the world, I decided to pop them into a podcast because each of these songs has a story to it, and I think for me the story is just as important as the song itself, because without the story the song doesn't make sense. There's no context. So I've taken it upon myself to do this. I work with quite a few sources. Predominantly I've been using the Irish National Folklore Archive, which is absolutely fantastic, not just for songs or for music, but for stories and for folklore in general. I'd absolutely recommend anyone with an interest in Irish folklore or Irish history to take a look at the National Folklore Archive. It's duchas.ie, duchas.ie. You can find that at. And what this is in the mid 1930s, every child in Ireland, in a national school in Ireland, was given homework by the government. This was to go home, speak to a parent or a family member, grandparent, an aunt or an uncle, and bring back to school a piece of folklore, a story about the locality, a riddle. A lot of the time this would be a short story or a ghost story or a pishogue. Cures, there were a lot of traditional medicine cures and things listed in these as well. All sorts of very, very interesting things that give you an idea of what life was like and the sorts of things that, you know, a 1900s Irish peasant would have experienced, the life they would have experienced. An awful lot of it deals with farming practices as well. You can, if you want to learn how a 19th century peasant made butter, a thousand children of the 1930s would be delighted to explain it to you. But do take a look at duchas.ie. It's a fantastic resource. There's a function that you can look on the map as well. You can see a map of Ireland, and it'll show you exactly where this national school was on the map. A lot of them closed down. The population of Ireland is a lot less now than it was back then, so there's less of a need for national schools. Or if you're interested in, if you're from the area, or if you have family that are from the area, it's very likely that you will find a piece of homework written by them that's been uploaded by be kept by the government and uploaded. So that might be of great interest to you. So the project broadly is this all started as a hobby of mine. I'm a musician. I'm a musician from the area. I'm a very strong interest in Irish history, a very strong interest in Irish folklore, and these three things together kind of led me. These three different strong interests kind of sent me down this path of using folklore to find old songs, looking up the history of the story of those songs within the historical context, and then recording and singing these songs afterwards. So the three interests that the very strong interests that I have all kind of come into play here. So I intend and I expect that I will keep this in some format or another, whether it remains as a podcast or not. But I think I will be continuing to do this work and continuing to bring these old lost songs back to life again. So this is the first episode of this podcast. I'm not going to go into any specific songs today. I just wanted to give an overview of what this is all about, the aims that I have with this podcast, and also to give a little bit of an idea as the subject matter that these songs tend to deal with. So, as I said, I'm not particularly limiting myself to any time periods, but Irish ballad writing had a gold age. This was in the 1800s. The beginning of this would have been during the Napoleonic Wars. During the Napoleonic Wars across Europe, England used the whole of Ireland, because Ireland is a colony. Of course, anybody from Ireland knows that, and I think most people tuning in at this stage, Ireland has a colonial past. We were a British colony for 800 years before we finally got our independence. So all of these songs would have been written and sung under occupation, by a nation under occupation, which is very, very important to keep in mind. So, as I was saying, in the early part of the 1800s, you had the Napoleonic era, where Ireland, particularly the Midlands of Ireland, places like Tipperary, Offaly, Kilkenny, where I'm from, these counties grew grain for the British Army. That was their job. There was a huge demand for grain across England, because they were feeding a massive army fighting Napoleon in Europe. So they had to supply their food sources. There's a saying, I think it's Sun Tzu, I'm not sure if he actually said it or not, but tactics win battles, logistics wins wars. So as part of the British military logistics, Ireland was a breadbasket producing millions and millions of tons of grain. This was largely transported out of Ireland. This massive food production was not for the local population, who relied mostly on potatoes. This was grain being grown on Irish colonies to be exported to England, almost exclusively. This caused a huge boom, an economic boom amongst the Irish peasantry that lasted decades. It lasted right up until Long Gortamore, the famine. So, and as a result, ballad writing, song singing, this kind of thing became more and more popular. There was a lot more of it going on because there was a huge economic boom, which I guess was the beginning of a golden age of Irish singing, Irish songwriting, and ballads. This was majorly interrupted. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about the famine. It's very remiss not to contextualize the effects of the famine when talking about anything to do with Ireland from the mid 1840s onwards. Um, on this podcast, I won't tend to describe what happened in Ireland from 1945 to 1949 as a famine, because it was not because it wasn't. It quite simply wasn't. A famine is defined as where an area cannot produce enough food for its inhabitants, and this was not the case at any stage in Ireland's in history. Ireland at the time was producing an abundance of food. The problem was that this food was not being given, it wasn't being made available to the people who lived and worked on these farms. Instead it was being sent over to England and Europe. It was sent as an English export. And this was deliberate by the British government, by the English government, as it attempts to solve the Irish problem as they saw it at the time. I don't want to go too deeply into the history of An Gorta Mór, the famine, but just on that point, I will be referring to this period in Irish history as An Gorta Mór, which means the Great Hunger. In order to maintain factual accuracy when describing this, because as I said, it was not a famine, and it should not be referred to as a famine. The vast majority of these songs that I will be dealing with were written and sung in the 1900s. They touch on many of the same subjects, from the whimsy of everyday peasant life, the churning of butter, the going to the markets, that kind of thing, to stories of great highwaymen and robbers and revolutionary leaders who were a big thing at the time. There was particularly in the hills and the Midlands, there were a lot of very famous Robin Hood type characters, such as Ned of the Hill, Brennan of the Moor. There's lots of these characters that entered into ballads, entered into local poems that were spread and shared across the country. And the reason that these types of songs became popular is because the vast majority of the peasantry understood. They could empathise with a character like Red O'Hanlon, who was a highwayman who would rob lords and ladies in their carriages as they travelled between estates across the Tipperary mountains. And the peasants would hear these stories and think, yeah, why not? Why not rob this lord and lady? These are the people driving us from our land. These are the people charging us extortionate rent. These are the people benefiting from penal laws, laws in Ireland that essentially made being Catholic illegal. There's a lot to cover. An awful lot happened in Ireland in the 1800s. So putting a lot of these songs into the historical context is quite a lot of work. So I'll be doing this, and I'm going to be looking at one song at a time. I think one song per podcast, perhaps two, if they're about the same theme. But I think looking at the themes of these songs is an important approach. Another great focus of these songs is the period of the failed rebellion of 1798, which saw tens of thousands of Irish men and women across the country rise up against the occupying English yeomanry with their pikes and pitchforks. A show of force that was absolutely astounding to the entire world at the time. These were peasants with no weapons, with just their pikes. And this happened in almost every town across Ireland. There was a coordinated effort. The song, The Rising of the Moon, is about this. Many of our great martyrs that are mentioned in songs today, such as Sean South of Garryowen, Roddy Macaulay of County Antrim, Father Murphy of County Wexford, who is mentioned in the song Bull of Vogue, each immortalised in ballads of their own. So the songs and the stories of '98 would have been an integral part of the social fabric um, in the early, particularly in the early 1800s, where people had an immediate memory of it. People had, family members that fought and died in the '98 rebellions. So the songs about these martyrs and about this rebellion would have been very, very important, would have been very influential to every subsequent rebellion that Ireland has had. You have the Young Ireland, the Home Rule movement, the Young Islanders movement, the Land League movement. These are all 1800s revolutionary movements against occupation, against landlordism, against colonization in such a way that they understood it on the ground at the time. So 1798 would have been a very, very important event for Irish ballads, almost ushering in a golden age of Irish songwriting that went on and continued to inspire revolutions, continued to inspire these secret societies that became revolutionary organisations that over the course of the next 100 years, over the next 150 years, led to the actual liberation of the state. So I believe these songs are very, very important. The influence that they have on subsequent generations, where they learn of great things, great rebellions, great battles that were fought before them. They can understand them. They learnt these lessons and applied them. It's no coincidence that many of the leaders of the 1916 Rising were ballad singers and writers. Most famously, I think Jim Larkin was a great singer of the song "Rising of the Moon," which is a 1798 song. So these types of songs would have continually inspired revolutionary leaders in this country, and I believe that's a very important thing. And to preserve these songs and to bring back to life a lot of these, I think is very important. And I'm very, very happy to do this work. So that's pretty much everything I wanted to say as an introduction. There'll be plenty more. Like obviously, every song that I take, I'll be fully putting into its context historically, so it can probably be understood today for what it is and for what it was. Because I feel that's very, very important, rather than just digging up and singing a song without its context. But that's pretty much everything that I wanted to cover as an introduction. I'm already going over. I said I'd be 15 minutes, and I'm already going over this. I have got an Instagram account at the moment for this project, and this is Bald Bill, BAULDBILL. I'll be sharing additional documents and interesting things that I find during my research here. If anyone is interested, wants to get in touch, do. I'd be delighted to hear from you. I also will be setting up a Patreon as well, because I would absolutely love more than anything for this project to become self-sustaining. If I could spend my full day, Monday to Sunday, looking up old songs, figuring out how to sing them, how to record them, and telling the story about them to people on the internet, that way, I think that would be me living my happiest life. So if you do feel like supporting that, if you have an interest in Irish music, if you have an interest in learning about the history of Irish music in particular, do get in touch. I'd love to hear from you as well. So I'll wind it up at that. Thank you very much for tuning in. This is the Bald Bill podcast on the stories of the lost songs of Ireland. I'll come up with a better title at some stage, something snappier, but for now that's what I'm sticking with. Thank you very much.